The Freedom Index provides a scorecard of how well a congressman is keeping their oath to the Constitution. For any patriot, the following information from mid-January 2021 may prove quite sickening. The rampant criminality is nothing short of mind-boggling. And you have to realize that betraying an oath of office is indeed criminal, even though it's not treated as such in practice. Government officials breaking the law is now ordinary. The Republicans, the ones who should be protecting the Constitution from the Democrats, are mostly failing. And all of the Democrats but one are also failing. In other words, Congress continues to ignore or to shred the Constitution of these United States. That's wholesale madness. No wonder Senator Rand Paul said not long ago that Congress has an approval rating of about 10%, but now it's likely closer to 1%. But let's put this into perspective. For more than 150 years, congressmen have been betraying their oath of office, especially with regard to the 10th Amendment prohibition against big government. If they had honored their oaths, we would not now have the deep state swamp and the civil service protections which lock that toxic soup into place. And we have to realize that congressmen are frequently forced to vote on bills for which they've had no time to read, much less time to study and evaluate. That in itself is criminal, like driving the entire country forward wearing a blindfold and earplugs. Now we can understand more deeply the caustic nature of nasty Pelosi and UnMensch McConnell. Republicans. But here are the Republican heroes, the top 7 Republicans with Freedom Index scores of 80% or better. Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky, District 4, is the only one at 100%. If we were to use the American school grading system, they would receive the A's and the B's, the top grades. Rand Paul, Kentucky Senator. Thomas Massie, Kentucky 4. Kenneth Buck, Colorado District 4. Andy Biggs, Arizona 5. David Schweikert, Arizona 6. Jody Hice, Georgia 10. And Morgan Griffith, Virginia 9. There are 23 Republicans in the 70 to 79% range for a C grade, a lackluster showing but better than most. Some of the names which you may have heard in the news in recent weeks are included here. Mike Lee, Utah Senator. Mike Kelly, Pennsylvania 16. Paul Gosar, Arizona 4. Matt Gaetz, Florida 1. Louie Gohmert, Texas 1. And there are 37 in the 60 to 69% range for a D grade. These included Bill Posey, Florida 8, Jim Jordan, Ohio 4. The remaining 145 Republicans had failing grades in the 0 to 59% range. Mitt Romney came in at the lowest score of 15%. How the GOP could ever have pushed that turkey in 2012 only shows how rotten is the state of the GOP in betraying the true patriot of Dr. Ron Paul. Failing Republicans at or above 50% included Ted Cruz, Texas Senator, Devin Nunes, California 22, Liz Cheney, Wyoming 1. For comparison's sake, rabid socialist, commie-loving Bernie Sanders, the Vermont Senator, is ranked at 45%. Failing Republicans at or above 40% included Lisa Murkowski, Alaska Senator, Rick Scott, Florida Senator, Benjamin Sass, Nebraska Senator, James Inhofe, Oklahoma Senator, Kevin McCarthy, California 23, Elise Stefanik, New York 21, Daniel Crenshaw, Texas 2. Failing Republicans at or above 30% included Tom Cotton, Arkansas Senator, Susan Collins, Maine Senator. Failing Republicans at or above 20% included Marco Rubio, Florida Senator, Chuck Grassley, Iowa Senator, Mitch McConnell, Kentucky Senator, Lindsey Graham, South Carolina Senator. And let's be clear about this. An index of 20% means that they betrayed the Constitution 80% of the time. You might notice that Republican senators have a far more poor average record than the Republican House members. Why is this? Is it because Republican senators tend to receive more of the toxic corporate funding? I don't know. Really, I don't want to know. I just want senators and representatives who have a score of 80% or better, or they need to be drummed out as betraying their oaths of office. This could include the idea that those who write the legislation in the first place need to keep the Constitution in mind while they compose those potential new laws. The legislation needs to be good works which are examined carefully for flaws, not flawed works which are rushed through without any chance to read them. Democrats. There was only one Democrat not failing, but that one was borderline at 60%, and we'll find out who that is in just a moment. The 247 remaining Democrats are failing. This is with Nancy Pelosi, California 12, Stephanie Murphy, Florida 7, and Kweisi Mfume, Maryland 7, at 0%. 100% betrayal of their oaths of office to protect the Constitution. In effect, they have become domestic enemies of the Constitution. The wolves are running the chicken coop. There are 35 Democrats in the 35 to 59% range. There are 91 Democrats in the 20 to 34% range. And there are 121 Democrats in the 0 to 19% range. This amounts to taxation without representation. This is treason. A whopping 115 Democrats are scoring worse than RINO bottom feeder Mitt Romney. Treason comes cheap and easy in Washington, D.C., and when there are no penalties for betraying an oath of office, betrayal seems to become the standard. If George Washington had followed such toxic laws, we would not now have a United States of America to rescue. The big surprise. The one Democrat not failing on the JBS Freedom Index is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That's right, AOC. Why would she be doing better than every other Democrat and better than 145 of 214, 67% of Republicans? Could it be to garner the oddball notion that she's a centrist after all her extreme biggest government rhetoric? For what purpose? To run for president? We'll have to wait on that one, but beware. Nullification. One of the solutions to all the criminality in government is called nullification. The Constitution makes it clear that it is the supreme law of the land. If any law conflicts with the Constitution, it is automatically null and void. This doesn't prevent criminals from becoming abusive and using unconstitutional powers to push unconstitutional laws, so be careful. But educate your city councils, your state legislatures, and your federal representatives and senators to use nullification liberally on unconstitutional laws and procedures. Don't wait for a sane president to do this for us. Now, one procedure which remains highly illogical and very likely unconstitutional involves the voting on legislation for which the senators and representatives have not had time to read or evaluate. If an automobile driver were to drive around town blindfolded, they would likely be arrested for reckless endangerment of others if they had not already crashed their car. Driving the nation's legislature equally blindfolded is equally criminal. Yet, under nasty Pelosi and her predecessors, this is standard operating procedure for the House. RINOs like Senator Mitch McConnell merely shrug their shoulders and chuckle at their freedom to rape the Republic. Lady Liberty needs protection from these pathetic scoundrels. Historical perspective. I like Thomas Sowell's take on the meaning of left and right as he described them in Intellectuals and Society, 2nd edition. And I'd like to add my own clarification, which has helped me remove mountains of confusion from the definitions we've been given, mostly by leftist academics. No surprise there. Farthest left. 100% government, 0% individual freedom and responsibility. Another word for this travesty of human stupidity is collectivism. Big centralized governance by control freaks, driven by fear and worry. Farthest right. 0% government, 100% individual freedom and responsibility. This is the side which respects the individual. In fact, it is frequently characterized by the term individualism. The left blindly sees this as selfish, but it isn't. The left is selfishly fearful and must have their big government safety blanket. That's about as selfish as you can get. Those on the true right value individual competence, compassion, and unconditional love, the opposite of selfishness. That puts Americanism tucked in real close to the farthest right. These United States started somewhere between 5 and 10% government. Right now, America has slid toward the left end of the scale. During the Eisenhower years in the 1950s, it might have been around 50 to 60%, a far cry from a constitutional government. After Kennedy's assassination, 55 to 65%. After Reagan's Day 69 warning shot, 60 to 70%. And after 9/11, closer to 65 to 75%. With Biden's, we now have close to 90 to 95% government. Collectivism has returned America to the swamp from which it had ascended nearly 250 years ago. The brilliant uniqueness of America has been tarnished to the point where it has the luster of rough granite. Over 150 years ago, the globalist-leftists sunk their claws into the beleaguered United States after its horrible Civil War and never let go. They grew the size of government, betraying the 10th Amendment. They murdered 4 presidents and had unwitting patsies to blame, accomplishing their mayhem far better than the attempt to kill President Andrew Jackson. During Jackson's term, America got rid of its tyrannical central bank and paid off all of its debts for the only time in our history. And when the government had grown too big to govern easily after the Civil War, the globalist leftists didn't solve the error by reducing the size of government. Instead, they doubled down and created civil service reforms, 1883, to lock the deep state swamp into place. 30 years later, with the creation of the private Federal Reserve banks, owned by private banks, which were in turn owned by international private bankers, the globalist leftists gained even more control over America. It's been largely downhill ever since. And even with the improvements to America with women's suffrage and the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, these good things were turned on their heads, giving the globalists an even more toxic grip on America, with things like third-wave feminism and government incentives to keep black children fatherless. Before he died, the late David Rockefeller bragged in his memoirs that he had conspired for decades against the best interest of these United States. Like a giddy schoolboy who delights in setting buildings on fire and torturing defenseless animals, he was proud of his treason against his own country. His efforts were not for the betterment of humanity in America, but for the creation of a new world order and a one-world government run by psychopaths just like him and his grandpappy Rockefeller. Beware of these chumps. They are quite clever. With their billions, they've been able to hire the brightest minds to help ensure their tyranny would happen eventually. The Rockefellers donated prime real estate in New York City for the United Nations headquarters. They and their associates wrote the UN policies and started such gems of Orwellian oppression as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. When you step back and think about this for a moment, those warming alarmists who accuse others of working for big oil are only shooting themselves in the foot because they are pushing the draconian agenda of biggest oil Rockefellers, unwittingly supporting their own deaths or enslavement. winning the war against climate madness and globalist leftist hegemony. The sane, hero-loving humans are going to win this war, and we can reduce the potential suffering by taking 100% responsibility for what the Rockefellers and their criminal congressmen have done. We let this happen, but there is real magic in that idea. This is the concept behind turning the other cheek and true forgiveness. This is the idea behind what Christ said about knowing the truth and the truth setting you free based on core programming of physical reality. This is the viewpoint of the true hero, and this is the stance taken by the true leader in solving any and all problems. When you take 100% responsibility not only for what you do, but also for what others do to you, you cease to be a victim. In fact, victimhood becomes entirely impossible. You nudge yourself from the viewpoint of the Homo sapiens victim into that of the spiritual child of God victor.